I wanted to express my gratitude to the CBS for accepting my presentation to this wonderful conference. So I'm a PhD student at the University of Warsaw, but I actually come from Russia, from the region which is called Buryatia, and that is why my thesis was devoted to my native land, and specifically to the expression of Buryat ethnic identity in the contemporary poetry. But my today's presentation is only partially connected to it because I have already finished my thesis and I want to start a new research which will be devoted to Buryat Buddhist literature. And today I aim to speak about one of the most outstanding Buryat didactic works, The Mirror of Wisdom by Erdeni E.Galshiev. And as I am just starting my research, today's presentation will be more like an overview of Buryat Buddhism history and the Mirror of Wisdom itself. So Buryatia, Russia, is one of the most northern areas of Vajrayāna Buddhism. Tibetan branch, mainly Gelugpa, started to spread on the territory of modern Buryatia in the beginning of the 17th century. At that time, Buryatia was an inseparable part of the Mongolian world. However, in the late 17th, the 18th century, its territory has become part of the Russian Empire. With the borders fixed, Mongolian and Tibetan lamas were prohibited to arrive to Buryatia. Nevertheless, these restricting measures led to positive results. The need in local educated lamas increased the theoretical and cultural level of Buryat Buddhism. Large temples were opening, faculties of philosophy, logics, astrology, medicine, etc., as well as printing houses and workshops for painters, wood carvers, and sculptors. Buddhist monasteries were transforming into cultural and spiritual centers of traditional Buryat society with great influence on all spheres of life. Here I got some examples of Buryat temples. This is the Tsongolsky Datsan, which is one of the oldest ones. It was built in the middle of the 18th century. Here is Aninsky Datsan, another representation of Buryat Buddhist architecture. The 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century, marks the period of prosperity, the kind of golden age of Buddhism in Buryatia. The amount of well-educated lamas among Buryats were growing, including such historical personalities as Agvan Darjiev, who was one of the teachers of Dalai Lama XIII, and Pyotr Badmaev, the specialist of Tibetan medicine, who is widely known in the West. And so by the end of the 19th century, a certain autocephality of Buryat Buddhism was achieved. The archival documents states the existence of 34 datsans on the territory of Buryatia, with publishing houses in 29 of them. At that period, 600 names of xylographic books and brochures in both Tibetan and Mongolian were published there. The works of Buryat religious leaders of the 19th century, their translations and commentaries of famous Buddhist texts influenced the formation of moral model of behavior of the local population in accordance with the fundamental Buddhist attitudes. In such a way, by the beginning of the 20th century, the ethical norms of Buddhism turned into the fundamental rules of education and behavior for the Buryat society. The Mirror of Wisdom by Erdeni E.Galshiev, The Mirror of Wisdom, explaining accepted and rejected under two laws, is treated as one of the most outstanding works of Buryat didactic poetry of the beginning of the 20th century. Erdeni E.Galshiev was a Buryat Buddhist monk. There is very few information about his biography, but it is known that he went to Tibet when he was young and received education at Drepung Monastery. In 1897, he received the degree of Dharampa and returned to Buryatia and stayed at Kudunsky Datsan for the rest of his life. With the October Revolution, which was, that is, after the 1917, Buddhism in Buryatia suffered decline and repressions. Almost all Datsans were destroyed and religious books burned. The situation started, however, to gradually change after the World War II. The Buryats were allowed to build a new Datsan near their capital of Buryatia in Ulan-Ude. And in 1966, the Mirror of Wisdom was refound and introduced to academic society by a Buryat scholar, Tsaren Dugarnimaev, who published it in Buryat language and in translation into Russian. The Mirror of Wisdom was originally written in Mongolian, but also has the Tibetan variant translated by one of his students. The exact date of the creation of this monument is unknown, but it is somewhere in the beginning of the 20th century. The work represents Subhashita, a genre of Buddhist didactic poetry, which is a combination of two Buddhist issues, the secular and the sacred. It can be characterized as aphorism that clarifies positive and negative qualities of people and good and bad actions. It is usually a quatrain, where two first lines express the thesis and two last lines give an example. The most famous work in this genre is a collection of aphorisms, Subhashita Radhanidhi, the elegant sayings of Sakya Pandita. And in comparison to work of Sakya Pandita, which consists of 457 verses, the Mirror of Wisdom contains 1,000 verses. However, the continuity of Buddhist work is obvious, and E.Galshiev himself writes in the colophon, following the kind sermon about two laws of Sakya Pandita, our first Mongolian spiritual teacher, being guided also by other shastras, I have united everything seen and comprehended during long time in order to show in words full of sense, samples of accepted and rejected for their clarification and realization by layman people in my native land. Notably, the work of E.Galshiev has no borrowings from the previous Subhashitas. In other words, he composed all the quatrains himself, basing on his own life experience and knowledge. The structure of Mirror of Wisdom is divided into 8 chapters. The first 6 ones are devoted to worldly issues, that is the secular part, starting with extremely practical advices for well-being of your body, property, and family, to the instructions for improvement of your mind, interrelation with other people, good intents, and good deeds. The last 2 chapters represent the sacred part and describe the 10 black sins of body, speech, and mind, and in general follow the principles of Lamrim for laymen. In such a way, the Mirror of Wisdom represents a certain guideline for self-cultivation which can lead to well-being and enlightenment. Further on, I would like to show you some of the examples of Subhashitas. For example, Subhashita number 368, creation or destruction, do everything softly. Softness conquers both softness and cruelty. Therefore, the wise says that only softness is sharp. With respect, treat the knowledge of other people as if it were a true treasure. If you do not know the knowledge of others, once you will find yourself under their power. Consider every manifestation of this world as a non-eternal illusion. Good or bad, high or low, all of this is a skillful creation of a tricky soul. Also reflect about all visible beings which do not express their own essence. Although seen by the eye, all this has no essence, like a shining moon circle reflected on the water. So, the Buddhist Lamas call the Mirror of Wisdom the Buddhist version of Bodhicharya Avatara. As characteristic to all Buddhist texts, this monument by E.Galshiev stays relevant and valuable even 100 years after it was written. In the modern context, the practices of Buddhism for laymen described there have become extremely relevant for the revival of Buddhist traditional culture, especially in the last 5 years. Buddhism is perceived as part of our ethnic identity. That is why, for the Buddhist people, the Mirror of Wisdom serves as a source of not only Buddhist, but also Buddhist traditional worldview. It is notable that the interest to this book is not artificially forced by lamas, but comes from the population itself. The new editions are printed, the translation into Russian is revised, the Mirror of Wisdom is widespread in social networks, audiobooks are recorded and broadcasted on the Buddhist FM radio. As for me, I myself would also like to impact to the popularization of this literary monument and maybe in few years to translate this literary work into English. So to conclude my presentation and returning back to the topic of today's panel, in my presentation I tried to describe historical practices of Vajrayāna Buddhism for laymen in Buryatia, which even today stay relevant and lighten the path for the people. Thank you for your attention.